Hi guys, and welcome along to the next video in this little series that we're doing here. Hopefully you'll have watched, it'd been great if you've managed to stick with us from the beginning, at least watch some of the previous episodes, and you'll know what we're trying to achieve and the process that we're going through. So far we've not even got into the sim yet. We've just been looking at all the various add-ons that I use that go along to make up the whole Flightsim experience. So we're into the sim now. In the last instalment of the series, we looked at choosing a flight, deciding the route, the flight number, and how we go about finding some real world routes and call signs, and how we go about planning the flight using SimBrief, which is my preferred tool. Other flight planners are available. So now we've actually loaded up the startup screen, the startup menu for P3D, which we've got here in front of us. Again, this should be fairly applicable to any other platform that you might be using, so hopefully other users, X-Plane and so on, will be able to get something out of it. So we've got running at the moment the actual sim itself, and then over on the second monitor we've got Navigraph charts and Active Sky running the weather, and in the background we've got Chase Plane, which automatically boots up as soon as it detects a sim, which will look for the aircraft that we load up and start running our view profiles, so we can camera profiles, so we can move around inside the aircraft. So we've chosen our route, we know where we want to go, and today that is going to be from Sydney to Melbourne, flying as Velocity 874, which is a real world call sign. So we need to go ahead and load up the sim and get ourselves started. Now, we've chosen where we're flying from. We also need to choose where we're going to start from, because obviously, especially if we're flying online or VATSIM, we don't want to be spawning onto a runway or on top of another aircraft in the middle of a busy session. That really messes people up, upsets the controllers, and causes all sorts of havoc. And it's nice, if you're going to fly the procedures properly from pushback and so on, it's nice to start up at a gate and do it as close to real world as we can do. So with that in mind, first thing we'll do is just grab Navigraph charts over here, the desktop version. I've also got the iPad app running just down next to me as well, which just keeps things nice and easy. You can always find the charts on the iPad there. But for now, we'll just bring them up over here, and we're going from Sydney, which we know from previous videos looking at the ICAO codes and what that means. The ICAO for Sydney is Yankee Sierra Sierra Yankee, and these are the charts. So we've got the airport info, the airport diagram chart, which we'll come back to in a little bit more detail later. For the minute, we're going to go to the parking bays and coordinates chart, which is this one here, for the domestic terminal. Sydney, depending on the layout, the size, the complexity of the airport, there may be 1 to 5 different pages of charts for parking bays, depending on how big the airport is. Sydney has 2 terminals, domestic and international, so the international is, that's the coordinates, the internationals are that one, that's the diagram, the coordinates for the gates at the international bay, and then the domestic terminal there. Depending on where you're flying from, what airline you're flying with, or airport, you can go on to either the airline's website or the airport's website. A quick Google search will tell you normally which terminal your particular carrier operates from. It may not always be easy to determine which actual gates the aircraft or the carriers are departing from. You can do that using some of the software we looked at in the previous videos, UK Flight Aware and Flight Radar 24. With a bit of detective work, you can usually map the aircraft position on the ground, if nothing else, to find out the gates or the piers, at least, which particular piers of a terminal they've departed from. So we know from experience, I'm going to be flying Virgin Australia Velocity. On their domestic routes from Sydney, they operate from the south part of the domestic terminal. One of these 2 piers, usually somewhere around the 50s, and Jetstar's in there too. And then the Qantas domestic flights operate from the northern part of the domestic terminal. So we can assume we're going to be, for ease, we're going to take gate 54 on the domestic 2 cul-de-sac just here. So we need to load that up into the sim as our starting position. So we've got the charts here. For now, we've just used the taxi tab in the Sydney Airport charts section in Navigraph, and just using the little save to quick links sort of feature here. By checking the box, it pops up on the right hand side, so you've always got them to hand, so you can then get rid of that menu if you don't need it, and you can see them with full size zoom in and move them around. So we'll keep that running on the other monitor, and we'll go to the sim and actually load up. So we're going to be flying a PMDG. We're going to be flying the 737 in Virgin Australia colours, which is there. We're going to be flying from Sydney, so we know that is Yankee Sierra Sierra Yankee. You can put Kingsford Smith or Sydney in there. I'm sure you're familiar with your own sim, your own brand of sim. And just make sure you get the right gates. There's different gate designators for different airports. They all work in different ways. They have different systems. There's 2 gate 54s at Sydney. I found this out the hard way by not checking thoroughly enough where I was loading up the first time, scrolling down, finding the first gate 54 and clicking on it. That's gate 54 at the international terminal. If you go further down, you get Delta 54, which is the domestic terminal, domestic 54 or Delta 54. There we go. Select that. Okay, we've already got Active Sky loaded up, and you can see that it's connected and found the sim. So we can then clear the weather in the sim. That'll allow Active Sky complete control without the sim trying to inject any other weather into it. And just for the sake of ease, it's actually dark in Sydney at the moment because I'm obviously in the UK. So I'm just going to reset to system time. So when we're going to fly, the time, the sim will think it's UK local time, but in Sydney, so it'll be daytime, so we can just see what we're doing a bit easier. So we can go ahead and load that up. Even with my system, it's reasonably fast. It's not hugely high spec, but it will take a moment or two to load up. And I guess that's just time to touch on the various systems that are out there, the different implications. Those of you who may have looked into it in a bit more detail will know that they are planning to take X-Plane over to Vulkan eventually, which will make use of multi-threading, make use of more of the cores in a 6 or 8 core processor. But for the moment, and I don't think ever, that will apply to Prepared or FSX. So from the point of view, especially of those two sims, your core speed of your processor is very important. Mine's overclocked to, I think it's 4.9. Even that, it can struggle on some of the really demanding tasks. So yeah, always, if you're thinking of building a system or upgrading a system, look at getting the most out of your core speed first, and then the graphics card, and then all the associated bits and pieces. A good motherboard is obviously very important, but the world is your oyster. You can spend so much money on these systems, but just take into account the system you've got and don't expect more from it than it can reasonably provide. And obviously cooling is another very important thing as well, because I'm running an i7 87, which is the 8th gen processor, and it's a 6 core, and it chucks out a lot of heat at overclock to 4.9. So that's obviously very important as well. There we go. So it's loaded up. It's just going to take a minute or two to just load all the various aircraft systems. PMDG is quite complex, as I suspect, to the new Airbus add-ons from FS Labs and so on. So they will take a moment or two just to initialize. I always give it time just to load everything up fully so that you don't get any issues. Some of the PMDG products can be a bit temperamental if you don't let them load properly. I guess that's online now. So in the first video, first or second video, we talked about generating panel states and saving them so that you can have the aircraft configured how you want it. So there's a couple of things we want to do. First of all, I'm just going to pop the sim brief over on this side as well, so we can get to that in a minute. When you're loading up, you want to bring your panel state up straight away so that the aircraft is in a state in which you would expect to find it. And you can start your sort of flow in the same order every time, so you don't have to worry about configuring switches. It's already there, ready to go. So we're going to load up a panel state that we created earlier, and if you're not sure about this, I haven't done it in previous videos showing you how in detail how to set it up, because that would be specific to the PMDG, and I know there'll probably be people out there on other aircraft. So check out how to do that in your specific aircraft type that you've chosen to fly. If you want, feel free to leave comments. If you want me to do something more specific, I will do. But it is definitely there's tutorials out there available on YouTube already. So we're just going to go into the sim with the PMDG. It's under the FMC menu on the right hand side, PMDG actions, panel state load, and I created one and saved it as turnaround with all the switches in the position that I want them to be. So load that up, it'll give it a moment or two. And what that does is it shuts down the engines, puts all the overhead panel how we want it, sets the FMC to a ready to load state, puts us onto ground power so that we are connected to ground electrics and air. And that is just loading up now, and it's done. If you're using GSX, now would be a time to go ahead and try and get that working. So we're just going to call that up, and the first thing we're going to do, we've deboarded already. We're going to assume that we've just picked this up after a transit shutdown and the outgoing crew have left the aircraft secure for us. So we're going to request catering. We've got Donata or Jetstar as the options for this gate, so we'll use Jetstar. And Gate Gourmet, because there's, well, no reason not to. So you can hear the catering trucks coming in. That just gets GSX loaded up and started in the background. And if we just pop outside, so there's the baggage handling and the air stairs coming in, and catering will be along shortly. And they will, you'll hear the GSX will start pinging at us to start opening doors on the right hand side for catering at some point. So we need to do one other thing in the aircraft setup side of things. We'll go back to this side of the FMC and go to FS Actions. This is again specific to PMDG because this is how you do it with this aircraft. Other aircraft vary on how you do this particular stage. What we need to do is load some fuel and some passengers and payload. So we go to SimBrief, just bring that over here. This is, if you're following exactly what I've done, then this should be presenting itself to you in the same way. Otherwise, the data will be in the same place on your flight plan, no matter what route you've planned and what you've chosen to do. So we've got our OFP, the operational flight plan here, and we're just going to scroll down. And the first bit we're going to look for, you can see here there's a line which would be signed off by the pilot in command to release the aircraft from dispatch when he's happy with all the final load sheet and the data and the weights that have been presented, and he'd sign on the dotted line there to accept the aircraft. Immediately below that is this figure here, the FinRes, final reserves. That is something we need to just take a note of where that is. Either write it down, as I've talked about before, is having notes set up on a laptop or on a piece of paper somewhere you can just scribble it down. I always jot down a few bits and pieces. The first thing you're going to put down is this for the final reserves, which is, we're going to 2281, so it's going to be 2.3 tons, and that means the final reserve amount of fuel that we have to have on reaching the arrival airport. That is something we need to enter into the FMC, so we need to just write it down or note where it is in the flight plan to come back to. Scrolling down further, you'll find the times. This is our estimated off-block times and departure and arrival times, and then underneath that is the weights. And this is what we're looking at here. We're looking at the zero fuel weight and the fuel weight. So zero fuel is the weight of everything: the aircraft empty weight, the passengers, the bags, and catering, all the sundries that come with it. And without the fuel, and then that is the fuel on top going together to make the total gross weight. So GSX is now beeping at us. It wants some doors open for catering, so we'll go into the menu, go to doors, and it wants the right hand side doors aft and fore opened, so they'll be done, and that will allow catering to crack on and do their thing. So we've got those figures here, 62.7. Now I mentioned this in planning, that will be rejected by PMDG because the profile in SimBrief is slightly inaccurate for the 800 series. it's just slightly over what is the max zero fuel weight. So what we can do there is, I mean, that might, in real world ops, that may change if somebody's offloaded, or it might be last minute revisions to the paperwork anyway. So it's not crucial that this is absolutely bang on, just so long as we don't end up with massively less fuel or massive differentials in weight. But we can just go into the FMC, bearing in mind those figures, 62.7, 6.8 tonnes. So yours may vary from what I've got there anyway, but I'll just show you what happens if we go back to the menu. First of all, we'll do the fuel, so we're going to enter into the data. In the FMC here, in the PMDG, there's a little click spot, brings up a text box which allows you to use the keyboard on your PC to enter the data. So that's going to be, we said 6.8 tonnes of fuel, so 6,800 kilos of fuel, and we enter that in the total fuel kilos, and there you can see that has agreed with the fuel totalizer on the aircraft. Return and go to payload. If I actually enter the figure, which is 62.7, 62.7, and enter it into the zero fuel weight column, you can manipulate this to whatever zero fuel weight you want. It will just come up with an invalid entry because it's too high. So you can use the handy little shortcuts they've got here and just set it to full, or you can set 100% there. I think it'll probably do that as well if we go. Close enough. The maximum it was set there is 99.7%, 61.7. So what we've effectively done is the flight planner had set our zero fuel at max weight, which was too much for the actual aircraft itself. So we'll just use the max weight or set full function here. So we still get a full load, although the figure is different to what the flight planner says. Catering are done at the rear, so we can go ahead to the doors page and close the rear door, close the forward door because they're done as well. Wonderful. Okay, so catering is done, cleaning will be happening, and refueling would be going on at this point as well. We're not going to simulate that because it's just unnecessary, it doesn't benefit us in any way. So we've refueled and we've loaded the aircraft payload using the specific method to our aircraft, in this case the PMDG. Other aircraft obviously are different, so just check out how to do yours, and if you've got any issues with any of them, just hit me up and I'll do a little tutorial on the different aircraft types if you need it. So the load is in, all the weights and figures are in, so then we can go across to, I use this side, I always use the first officer side for all the system stuff and doors pages, and then the captain side for all the actual flight data. So we'll do the same here. We use the click spot to bring that up, and we can type into the scratch pad at the bottom using the keyboard. And we're in the POSINIT, or the position initialization page. Because of the way we set the panel up for a turnaround state rather than a cold and dark, we've already got the IRSs aligned and it knows its last position. But what we're going to do, just to make sure that it's super accurate, is we're going to enter the ICAO code as a reference airport. Pop that in there. You can put the gate in sometimes, depending on the database. Sometimes it's got it, sometimes it rejects it. I don't normally bother. That's normally accurate enough as a starting point. As long as there's the correct value for the reference for the airport that you're starting at in there, then it can start to calculate its position and work out where it's going to as it starts moving. So then we go across to the route page at the bottom. That's all you need to do there, just put that reference in there and go to the route page, and you'll notice reference airport is obviously our starting or departure airport, Yankee Sierra Sierra Yankee. If I go over to route page, then it populates that code into the scratch pad as our origin airport, because that's where we're flying from. Our destination, I'll put my teeth in, start again. Destination airport is Melbourne, Yankee Mike Mike Lima, goes into the destination, and velocity 874 is our flight number. I won't talk about using the route upload function today. I'll do that in later videos if we start doing some more longer haul interesting stuff with the 777. For now this is like a 4 waypoint route, so we'll just type it in manually. Runway. We would do one of two things. We either look at the weather and make a guesstimation, or if we were flying online and there was ATIS available, or You can go and get your clearance. You get the clearance, and then you'd be cleared an assigned runway, so you'd know what runway you're using, and that would go in there. What I'm going to do is just make an assumption by grabbing active sky, bringing it across, basing the fact that the wind is, that's the wrong airport, no, it's Melbourne, just looking ahead at our arrival. The wind is at 040 at 11 knots, so that's from 040, so that's from the northeast at 11 knots. How does that add up to departure and arrival runways? We need to look at the chart, so we'll bring that across here. The wind is from 040. It's coming from the northeast. You want to be taking off into wind, or the marginal crosswind. Obviously, the larger the aircraft, the more crosswind component it can accept. So a Cessna could work to approximately a 15 knot crosswind component. I think a 737 can handle slightly more than that. So, depending on operational procedures, you could take 07. It's a bit shorter, and you've still got a crosswind from the left, or you can take 34, because there is a headwind component as opposed to a tailwind component. Remember, the wind's coming from the northeast. So if you're taking off on 16 here, you'll be facing south, you'd have a tailwind component. So you could take 34. It's a longer runway, reduces the performance requirements for takeoff, and you've still got a headwind component, albeit with a slight crosswind component as well. And typically for the airport operations here at Sydney, they operate on the north-south parallel runways. So in this instance, it depends. You could obviously, if control were online, you'd be assigned the runway. You could take 07. You have a shorter taxi out there. In this instance, we're going to take 34. It's a longer runway. We have reduced performance implications for the takeoff. So we're here at the moment at domestic 2 cul-de-sac, and I'll just pop the SimLink feature on there, and that's our moving map position, so that tells us where we are on pier there. So we're going to assume runway 34 left for our departure, and then we can just briefly look at the taxi routing as well whilst we're thinking about that. So it will be usually here it would be down to Lima, cross at Lima, and then all the way down to Alpha 6, unless you specify that you're light, you're not at full weight, and you can take an intersection departure. You could say to air traffic, I can take a Bravo 10 even if you're particularly light, or an Alpha 5, and they may allow you that if they've got operational availability for those. But our taxi routing will be from here. In the absence of any other information, you can assume it will be down one of these two taxiways, either Bravo or Charlie, from here down to Lima, crossing 3416 at Lima, and then down Alpha to Alpha 6. In this case, I think there is actually a taxi routing chart for Sydney somewhere. Let's have a quick look if there is one down here. A lot of airports will have taxi routing or guidance systems, or some way of standard domestic taxi routes. There we go. So this is textual. So we're on bays 53, 55. So we're on domestic 2. So that's an arrival taxi routing, is it? From an arrival, so that'd be an arrival taxi routing. So it's via Bravo and Charlie on the way in. There we go. Standard domestic taxi route departures. So there you go. There's no departures text as well. Some of them have a map with actual arrows going on. I think Stockholm has a departure taxi, an arrival taxi routing chart with actual arrows on superimposed on the airport chart. But this one is all textual. So we've got departures. There we go. So from domestic 2. Gate 54, departure runway 34 left, and we're a jet, so it'll be Charlie, Lima, Alpha, Alpha 6. So we will be taxiing Charlie, which is down here, Lima Alpha 6. So that's our taxi routing pre-briefed, so we can just refer back to that as when we need to. So for the minute we can ditch the charts, come back to our FMC, and we're going to put 34 left as our departure runway. Done on that page. You'll see here we're in the route section of the FMC, 1/2, 1 out of 2. There's a second page, so we use next page down here. Works very similar on the Airbus as well. And that is now our routing. So we need to now call up our flight plan and have a look where is the routing on here that we pre-planned. So that would be the quickest way to find it is up at the top in the summary section, and our routing is here. Now, depending on where you are flying in the world and how you've got your sim brief set up, it may well offer you options for a departure, which is the SID, Standard Instrument Departure, SID, and the arrival, the STAR, Standard Terminal Arrival Route. Anything with a number designator on the end, like Cliff 4, Lizzie 5 Alpha, they will be your departure and arrival routes. A SID and a STAR, an instrument departure, instrument arrival. So they're not necessary for the routing at the minute. You don't need to worry about those. So your first waypoint here in the routing section in the FMC is Wollongong, the Wollongong NDB, and that there is our route. So Wollongong, Airway Hotel 65 as far as Razzie, and then from Hotel 65 we go to waypoint Razzie, and that intersects with Airway Quebec 29. So we get off of H65 onto Quebec 29 at that intersection, and then we go to Lizzie. Lizzie is the last waypoint on the route. So that is a fairly short route, 3 waypoints, 2 airways. So we can go ahead and just type that in manually into the FMC. So we're just looking at those details now, ignoring the first and last bit because they're procedures. So that is my route. You may be flying something different, but you should find a similar format. If you've got nothing at the start of your routing, it means it hasn't offered you a departure. And what you can do just to verify that is to come down to the map here. Where are we? There we go. If we just zoom in there, you'll see Cliff is the first waypoint, so that's in the Cliff 4 departure. So there's no airway that's ID'd as Cliff 4. That's actually the SID or the SID. First waypoint then is Wollongong at the end of the Cliff 4 onto the Hotel 65 airway. So you can just verify that using the map as well. So our routing starts at Wollongong down to Lizzie, and we can just get rid of that, keep it up where we can see it, and we can type it in. Now we should be able to use a fairly easy format here. I think this is fairly standard across the Airbus range as well, that you should be able to go to your first waypoint. So we're going to the first waypoint. There's a few come up here. We can just ID that they are what they are, so an NDB, an ILS, an ILS DME, and where they are in the world. This gives you the full name identifier for it, which is the Wollongong NDB, and it's also in the southern hemisphere. We look at that there, that's its Latin long position in the southern hemisphere. It's the only one there in the southern hemisphere, so it's quite obviously the only one that is applicable to our flight. So we can just line select it. You just want to verify that you've got the right one. There may be a few, if we were flying from, say, Birmingham or Manchester, it might be the Wolverhampton DME that we were using, but it's not in this case because obviously we're down in Australia. So line select the correct one, and that pops it in the direct to, and then our first airway is the Hotel 65. Pop that in the via, so we're going to Wollongong, then via Hotel 65 to the next waypoint. Now this is where it gets nice and easy, because instead of typing in the next point and then the next airway, you can just pop in the next airway, and it should recognise that if you're getting off of Hotel 65 onto Quebec 29, the only intersection that you can do that is Razzie, which, if you look at your flight or my flight plan, is the intersection between Hotel 65 and Quebec 29, and that would work in theory, for any plan where you've got where it's listed as waypoint airway, waypoint airway, waypoint airway, you can pop the airway in and then the next airway, and it will recognise the waypoint that intersects those two airways. Obviously there's only one instance of it in this case, because our next waypoint is Lizzie, which is the last waypoint on the plan. And there we go, that's my flight plan into the FMC. That is now available. I can activate it. You'll see the execute light pops up down here, and this is the same procedure for all Boeing FMCs. Pop the execute button in, and then we get some new options come up, and the routing has started to be populated into the display. So logically you'd step across using the line select key to the next page of data that you need to insert information. What we're going to do just before that is we'll pop in the departure. So our departure then, if we get flight plan back across quickly, mine here is offered us the Cliff 4, but we know we're taking, because of the weather, we're going to take 3-4 left. So we just need to get the charts. We'll just bring that across here very quickly. We'll go to the Standard Instrument Departures tab, SIDS. So if I find the Cliff 4 RNAV, and just select that very quickly, that is indeed applicable to 16 right. This is the Cliff 4. So 16 right is this runway here. It's the same piece of tarmac, reciprocal runway. So 16 with a 160 heading, 34 with a 340 heading. So in actual fact we're taking off in the opposite direction. So the Cliff 4 is no longer applicable to this departure because it applies to a different runway. So we can look from the same chart. We need to end up at the Wollongong NDB, and we can look at this chart, and actually from the same piece of tarmac but heading the opposite direction, runway 34 is the ANCUB 1 departure, and if we follow it through to ANCUB, then you have one of the transitions, and I'll show you what that means in real terms in a second. You either got a transition with radar vectors to your first waypoint if your routing starts over here somewhere off to the north, or if you're routing down to the south, you've got the options of Cordo or Wollongong as a transition, and that does track to Wollongong, so that will be a viable option. ATC would assign you a SID if you're flying on VATSIM. If not, you can just use the charts to ascertain which one is the most applicable to your runway and the first waypoint of your route, and all it is just a procedure that joins the dots from where you're starting to the first waypoint in your actual route. So in this case we're going to take the ANCUB 1 departure. So we can go ahead and go to the departure arrivals page. I know this works slightly differently for the Airbus MCDU, so just check out how to enter the procedures into your particular aircraft. For the Boeings, you have a separate departure arrival page, and it brings up your two airports that you've got in the flight plan, your departure and your destination. So we can use the departures tab, because obviously we're only going to be able to depart from Sydney, which is where we are on the ground. And if we do it this way around, we've got 3-4 left active. So we use that, we type that into the position page. So we just click on that. That should remove any procedures from this side that aren't applicable to that runway. It doesn't always work depending on how the airport is set up. Some airports have procedures that are applicable to all runways, so it doesn't matter, they'll all populate this route. But as you see, that's by clicking on that particular runway, it's reduced the list down here I'll just erase that, and you can see there's now 3 pages worth of SIDs of procedures. If I click on the appropriate runway, there's now only 1 page, because these are the only procedures available for that runway. And it is the ANCUB 1 departure, and there's now a transition option here. You just go back to the chart quickly. That basically means it's the ANCUB departure as far as ANCUB, and then you have a choice of where you're transitioning from the SID to your routing. So we're going to transition from Wollongong. Cordo is the other option. We don't want that one. So just verify if it comes up with a transition option here. Maybe no transition, in which case you just leave it blank. or if there's none available, it means there is no option for transitions. But in this case there's 2, and we've just verified that Wollongong is the first waypoint of our route, so we're going to transition via Wollongong, and then that becomes executable, so we execute that, and that's now active in the route. And what we would then just do in real world procedures is nip to the legs page, and you would probably call this up on the plan function of the display as well, and just step through. So by going into plan, by rotating this little switch here, dial here on the EFIS control panel, it pops this into plan view, and it pops the legs page into a steppable process. So you can use this button down here, mark step, to step through the waypoints, and you can see the display will step through in sequence. So you can just double check that you've got all your legs, all your waypoints in sequence as you expect to have them. And you see there we've got a gap formed. There's nothing beyond Wollongong there. If I just go using the FMC, go to the next page, you can see there's a route discontinuity. What that means is we've put in the route first, then we put in the departure procedure, and it just needs to tie the two together. So in actual fact, if you look at the last waypoint of the SID, the SID, is the Wollongong NDB. The first waypoint of our route is also the Wollongong NDB, so we don't need them in there twice because they are the same waypoint. It's just that one was put in by us, and one is inserted automatically by the SID as a departure waypoint. So what we can actually do is we can clear that gap up by bringing Razzie up to the next in line. So the last in line, last in sequence there is the Wollongong NDB on the SID, and then Razzie will be our next waypoint. So if we line select it, it brings it into the scratch pad, and just dump it into where the discontinuity is. It will remove the previous waypoint, which was the Wollongong that we typed in manually, which we don't need because there's already one there. Same waypoint, just would have been inserted twice. That's gone to grey, and there's a mod route there, modified route, and the execute lights come up, so we're happy that that is acceptable. Execute that, the grey box goes out, the line in the flight plan becomes solid. If we zoom out a little bit using the range rings, we can then see Wollongong there is our last waypoint of the departure. Razzie is the next one, and so on down the track. And you can continue stepping through as far as Lizzie, which is the last waypoint. So we will need to do some descent planning and put a star as a terminal arrival route into the FMC, but we'll do that in just a moment. We'll just finish off the weights and performance page first in the FMC, because this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So we've entered our routing as far as Lizzie, and we've entered our fuel and our payload over on the other FMC, so that's actually physically loaded into the aircraft. So if we now go to the init ref page, the initial initial reference page, I think it is. So that brings up the perf init, or the performance initialization page, which is this button will bring up different pages depending on the stage of flight that you're in. So at the moment on the ground we're still we've not commenced the routing, but commenced the flight. So it gives us the perf init, or the performance initialization page. This is where we need to know the couple of bits of information that we entered over here, and these figures that go into here need to be not from the flight plan, but the actual figures that we entered into the FMC. Remember, we entered a different payload to what was in the flight plan. So we have actually entered into the aircraft a zero fuel weight of 61.7 tons. So that is the figure that goes into here, 61.7 into the zero fuel weight here. And that, you can see that populates the gross weight, because it now knows the empty weight of the aircraft, plus it knows what fuel it has on board at the moment. This is where we enter our FinRes, or our final reserve data, for the FMC to make sure that we're not using reserve fuel and calculate the fuel burn accordingly. So 2.3 tonnes was the fin-res, or the final reserves, on the flight plan, which we can accept, and that goes in there. Also on the flight plan, at the top in the summary page, is the quickest way to find it. You'll find your cruise, which in this case is given as flight level 340. That was automatically generated. You can manually input that into the flight plan if you wish, and of course you can accept different cruise altitudes, either by requesting them from from ATC, or by being requested to fly them by ATC for restrictions or whatever reason. We're going to take 340. 340 goes into there, and that is all the data that we can enter, that we physically, well, there's a couple of bits there, but for the moment that is all data we can enter that we know is concrete. This is the bit that I want to talk about very quickly, that is open to us a bit of interpretation. I'm just going to go to a browser page quickly, try and find something I found yesterday, which is all about the cost index. I think it was on the Flightsim forum. There was one somewhere, maybe on the Flightsim forum. Basically, it's a sort of a coding that tells you, tells the FMC what sort of performance you expect from it in terms of fuel burn or economy, and different airlines operate at different cost indexes. In essence, the higher the cost index, the less the FMC concerns itself with fuel economy, and the more it concerns itself with speed and getting to the destination in a prompt manner. The lower the cost index, conversely, the more it concerns itself with fuel economy, and it will fly slightly slower and burn slightly less fuel. There was potentially a page somewhere, I can't find it now, which had a list of various cost indexes. Didn't have one for Virgin Australia anyway. It did have one for Qantas domestic routes, and that suggested they operate their 737-800 on domestic routes with a cost index of 40. So in the absence of any better information, I'm going to use a cost index of 40. So we'll enter that there, and that becomes an executable value. So we'll just leave that for a minute. So there's a couple of bits we need to also look at here, which we need first of all we need the flight plan for. So we'll just drag that across very quickly, and we're looking at cruise wind. That is, it allows the FMC some more up-to-date fuel and performance and time planning by knowing what the wind will be at cruise altitude. So we use, in the OFP section down here, we scroll down further from the weights and plan fuel section, which is there. We scroll down past the nav log or the flight log with the individual waypoints to the wind information, and we look at this, the top of climb waypoint, which is automatically generated as the point at which we will reach our cruise altitude, which in this case we've planned for 340. We'll assume we've been given that by ATC. At the moment that is showing winds of 340 at 340 of 264 degrees, 264 at 101 knots. Now I suspect, because I generated this flight plan yesterday and didn't get around to flying the departure and actually filming this video yesterday, I suspect that may have changed. So what I'm going to do very quickly is just replan the flight using the same data, and just generate a new OFP so we get better wind information, because obviously 101 knot wind is going to have a massive impact. So if we plan for that and it's vastly different, we don't want that. So if we go up to, this is a very quick way of doing it, if we just go to edit flight, that keeps all the details that we put in already. It just allows us to edit any data that we want. It's also logged me out, which is always handy. Let's bring that into the middle, so I have a feeling you probably can't see that too well because of my monitor's wider than the 1080 view that you've got in the recording software. So we've hit edit flight, which goes back, keeps the data that we've got, but goes back to the compiling page, if you will, and then we'll just hit generate OFP again, because we've not changed any of the performance data or anything like that. We're just going to change, it's going to use the current wind as opposed to the wind from yesterday. That's very important, and especially on a long haul flight, in the absence of live weather data, which you would get if you're obviously in real world flying on an actual aircraft. You'd have company providing you real world up-to-date weather. You may want to just replan the flight using the same data, just getting the most current wind before you come into your descent phase. But for now we'll just do it this way. So it has generated the flight plan, and if we go back down to the OFP, scroll down to the wind information, look at the top of climb, 340, and it's half the wind speed, so that's much more accurate. So it just goes, just worth noting that it's worth, if you leave a lot of time between planning and executing a flight, worth just getting the most up-to-date wind information. So we've got winds from 293 at 52 knots at that flight level, and minus 52 degrees. And I'll show you why that's important in a second. So if you just highlight the field that you want in your flight plan and dump it out of the way so we can see what we're doing in the FMC. So we're going to pop in the cruise wind, which is 293 at 52. 293 forward slash makes it at 52 knots. Pop that in there. And we've got this section, ISO deviation. International standard atmospherics are 13 degrees at sea level and pressure of 1013 at sea level. And each flight level has its ISO, its standard atmospheric conditions. And the standard atmospheric conditions are minus 52 degrees at flight level 340, which actually, if I look at mine today, that is minus 52, so we leave the ISO deviation as 0. If there's a deviation between the standard figure for the particular flight level you've entered and what it's showing in the wind information section, if that's definitely the charts, not the flight plan. If that figure for me had read anything but minus 52, if it had read something different, say minus 42, we'd have had a plus 10 ISO deviation differential between standard and actual. So we would have entered 10 in there. Similarly, if it was minus 62, that would have been 10 degrees cold, or minus 10 degrees in the ISO deviation. But as it stands, it is exactly the same, so we leave it at 0. The last thing is the transition altitude. I'll show you where to find that. I'll explain a bit more about it when we get into the aircraft proper. So on your chart, on your departures chart, on your SID, or in fact on most of the charts relative to the any diagrammatical charts relative to the airport, the airfield, you'll find something up here which says transalt, and it will be given as normally a flight level or an altitude. Now this has led me on to a mistake I made previously, which I have done again, but I'm going to keep it in because it just highlights the importance of triple checking your charts before you get into the planning stage. If you look at the transition altitude section here, underneath that says non-jets only. So actually this procedure is applicable to non-jet aircraft, Dash 8s and so on like that, the turboprops. So you can see I've got highlighted underneath the DINA 7 departure. If I go to that, that's actually for the wrong runway. So we just need to go down through the plan until we find, in fact it might be the Abbey. Let's have a look at the Abbey departure. It's still the wrong runway. There we go. So we need to just find the correct chart for the type of aircraft we're flying. So if we look at this one now, in the same box at the top here, it says jets only. So that is for jet aircraft as opposed to non-jet aircraft. So actually we want the Wollongong 2. So that takes us from the correct runway, which is if we zoom right in here, which is 34 left, and to Wollongong. So the Wollongong 2 departure from 34 left. So we'll just show you how to correct errors in the FMC. So from that chart there, we can take the information we need still, which is the transition altitude 10,000. So we'll pop that in this page, and then we can sign this page off and execute it. There, execute that, and we'll just go to the departure and arrivals page. So we can imagine that we've either messed up our planning, or we might have been reassigned a different departure by ATC. So we just need to go through and do the same exercise again. Select the runway, so we've still been assigned the same runway, 34 left, and in this case we've now assigned the Wollongong 2 departure. No transition because it only goes via Wollongong, and we can execute that. Go back to our legs page and just step through very quickly to see if there's any discontinuities, which there are. So we can bring Razzie, as we know that is the next waypoint after Wollongong, up to there. So it should now read Wollongong to Razzie and so on down the route, and we can execute that. And that's just modified the route to make it correct. So I'll just pop that back into map view because we don't need the plan view up anymore. You might notice that I've got my, as an aside, I'm using Chase Plane to navigate the views of the aircraft. I'm using the keypad buttons on the computer keyboard, and obviously because I'm typing, I've got the text box highlighted in the FMC. As I'm typing, it's also typing the data into there as well. So just either check that before you start navigating around your views, or you'll have to just make sure you erase that, or you can use the numpad on your keyboard for typing data into the FMC, and that way it doesn't accidentally jump around your views when you're trying to type numbers into the FMC for entering figures and so on. So there, we've modified our departure to make it correct, and we can go back to the init.ref page, and that is now executed, and we can accept it. Transition altitude is correct, cost index is in, the flight levels in, zero fuel weight is correct. So we're following the same format of stepping across into the next relevant section, which is our N1 limit. Now, this is all about performance calculation. I've yet to find, I believe TopCat was an okay performance tool. I don't know if there's one out there that's better. I don't even know if that's supported anymore. I think it's probably not. I don't know if it's even updated to reflect the newer aircraft. It's about planning the takeoff thrust, flap settings and so on for your performance. And what the real world sort of procedure and the way it's looked at is the longer the runway, the longer the takeoff distance available, the takeoff run available, the less thrust required to reach your rotation speed. So the less fuel burn, the less environmental impact, less noise to neighbours and so on, and the less wear and tear on the engines. So where possible, they always try to reduce the maximum thrust used at takeoff to reduce all these impacts. And that can be done. It's done in a couple of ways. I think it's only done in one way, by using an assumed temperature in the Airbus, but it's done in two ways here. You can limit the maximum thrust rating, so it's called a thrust derate. So there's 26k available, derated to 24k or derated to 22k, or you can bump it up to 27k if you're hot and high and heavy. That's to say your heavy aircraft, your outside air temperature is hot and you're at high airport elevation where everything becomes less effective. So you could bump it up to a maximum of 27k. So we can look at the chart for Sydney, look at our departure runway, which will be 34 left, and we can look at the figure next to the runway, which each runway has there. You'll see we've got 34 left and right, so it's a pair of parallel runways, and they're reciprocal runways, 16 right, 16 left, facing the other direction, then one intersecting runway there, and they all have these figures written against them. Feet and then meters next to it in smaller text. So we've got 30, more bar a foot, we've got 13,000 foot runway available, so it's nice and long, especially if we take a full length departure for a 737 to get off the ground, even at sort of fairly high weight. So we can then assume we can derate the takeoff. And I'm doing this sort of by educated guesswork, because as I say, there's not a planning function that I've ever come across that really is accurate or usable. Please pop something in the comments if you know of something that I don't, because that's something I really I'm sort of searching for. So that's our departure routing there, the Wollongong departure. That's our runway that we'll be taking off from 34 left, and that's the figure there that we've got as a takeoff run available. All bar a foot is 13,000 feet. So we can derate the takeoff. So the first stage of doing this is to limit the max thrust to 22k, so it's derated. And then further we can derate the performance of the engines. Again, I'm not a qualified Boeing pilot, so my understanding the way this works is as follows. If we were on the ground in, say, Dubai, and it was 50 degrees outside, the engines, the air would be less dense, so the engines wouldn't perform as well. They wouldn't produce as much thrust at max power as they would, say, on the ground in the UK in the, March, when the temperature might be 10 degrees outside, because the air will be more dense. So it assumes the performance at a given temperature. So it's plus 17 outside at the moment. It would then calculate what the performance would be at, say, 45 degrees if the outside air temperature was 45 and not 17, and it will reduce the amount of power accordingly so that there's less stress on the engine. So you can see we've got 22k N1. N1 is the speed of the big fan at the front of the engine. 22k M1 gives us a maximum of 92.7% N1. Pop in 45 degrees as an assumed temperature, and it reduces, so we've got a reduced 22k N1 to 88.6. I'm going to say 88.6 is probably a little bit too low for our takeoff weight, because we are at max zero fuel weight. Although we've only got we're not at full fuel, so we've got a bit of leeway. But I'm just going to derate that to 40 instead, so that gives us 89% N1 for our takeoff performance, and that should be more than enough. I'm doing this a combination of educated guesswork and watching Flightsim's YouTube channel, who I keep coming back to and referencing. The real world Boeing pilot, I think he's a training captain as well. So he knows his stuff and produces some great in-depth detailed videos on the 737. So I'm stealing a lot of sort of techniques and slightly more advanced bits and pieces from him. So I've guesstimated that a 40 degree derate, 40 degree assumed temperature of the 22k derate will be enough for the weight that we're at and the runway that we've got available to us. So that's what we're going to enter there. The next page in sequence with the takeoff page, we can assume we've got up to, I'll show you quickly over here, the flat placarding. Speeds wise, we're absolutely fine in terms of speed limits for the flaps. We've got up to, I think it's up to 15 flaps for takeoff, well, 10 or 15 flaps for takeoff. Typically we use between 1 and 5 depending on how heavy we are and the length of runway we've got available. We've got plenty of runway available, so we're going to use flaps 5 for takeoff. And that has populated here the V speeds that we need to accept into the active column there. Using the weight and the flap setting, it's calculated the V speeds. And also down here we've got the centre of gravity and the trim. Really handy with the PMDG, and I think probably some of the Airbuses do it for you as well. Double click on that and it enters the C of G, centre of gravity, balance, and then the trim. The trim is the position of either depending on the aircraft, the trim tabs or the actual vertical stabilizer, the horizontal stabilizers, the elevators or elevons, depending on what aircraft you're flying, at the back of the aircraft. I'll just come out of there, go outside. Should be able to see, if I actually trim the aircraft, you should see the just about see the moving. That's not the best view in the world. So the entire tailplane in the 737, the entire horizontal section moves with trim. So it's currently angled with a slightly negative angle of attack, which actually produces downward lift or downward force on the tail. So as the airspeed increases, that forces the tail down, which forces the nose up, causes the aircraft to pitch up. So we can set a very defined angle, a very precisely defined angle for the weight and the speed that we will be taking off at, which means that as we rotate, we can pull back on the controls, bring the aircraft to a nose-up position. When we get to the pitch required for the climb out, we should be trimmed and we can release the back pressure and it should hold it. That's the idea behind it. So it's fairly precise. The FMC is pretty good at calculating it. But that's the idea of trim, is it reduces the amount of physical pressure on the controls that is required by the pilot by actually manipulating the position of either the controls or a tab that sits on the control surface, depending on the size of aircraft you're flying. So that is done down here. You can see there's a scale here and the trim wheel, that wheels. I've got mine mapped to one of the rocker switches on the yoke, so that's trimming nose down, and the other way is trimming nose up, and it is asking us for 5.4 units of trims, just over 5, which is in the takeoff band there, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units, 6, 7, 8, so we're just 5.04, so we're just going to set it nose down a little bit. On the scale there we're going to set 5.04, about there, units of trim. There, and then we can accept, by clicking on these, it will bring the V-speeds active, and that will be our takeoff weight, 68.6 tons. So that is complete, and that should then be the FMC loaded. So what we want to do is take some of the data out of the FMC and use that to start setting up the MCP, which is the mode control panel up the top here. So we're looking at a couple of things. We're looking at our V speed, which is our V2 speed. So we've got V1, which is our commit speed on the takeoff roll, VR, the rotation speed, the point at which we start to rotate the aircraft, and V2, our safe climb speed, minimum safe climb speed. V2 is what we bug in the MCP, which is in this case 148 knots. There, our heading, our initial heading from the chart, from the Wollongong 2 departure, initial heading 335 degrees up to 800 feet. So 335 is the runway heading, up to 800 feet where we start a left turn to 290 degrees. That is the first constraint of that departure, which we'll brief shortly. So 335 degrees is our initial heading, which can go into the MCP here. And normally when you call up air traffic clearance, if it's not printed on the charts, some parts of the world print the initial climb on the departure charts, the point at which you don't climb beyond without further clearance from what would normally be departures or centre, depending on who's online or Flightsim. That would be printed on the charts or given to you in your initial clearance. I tell you at Sydney it's 5,000 feet, and the departure clearance would normally be something like cleared to Melbourne via Wollongong flight plan route, Wollongong being the first waypoint in our final flight plan. The Wollongong 2 departure, runway 34 left, initial climb 5,000 feet, and then squawk 3413, whatever it may be. So your squawk code would go into the transponder down here. this little guy down here, 4 digits. If you're not flying on Flightsim, it doesn't really matter. If you want to be accurate, you put in the uncontrolled IFR squawk code, which is 2000. Pop that in the box, and that's how I have it left. But if you're flying on Flightsim without control online, you're not under control. 2000 is what you set, but I think it does it automatically on Flightsim anyway if you're not squawking under control. But if you're given a squawk code, it's 4 digits, and it goes in that box there. That's the transponders manipulated by the inner and outer rings on both sides. And then you might be given the frequency for your departure controller as well, your Sydney approach in this case, Sydney departures. Obviously we're not online, so it's of lesser importance. But we need our initial climb, which is 5,000, so that's now loaded into the FMC. That's all set. And we can go ahead and look at our checklists. Earlier on I gave you the Fly UK Aero 737 checklist. As far as I'm aware, it's just open source, it's available to anybody. There doesn't seem to be, I've been using it for ages, there doesn't seem to be any caveat to using it where you've got to make a donation or link anybody or reference anybody, but it's clearly obviously a Fly UK Aero asset, as it says here. Definitely just clicked out of that then. And you'll notice I've probably mentioned this before with the PMDG, but as I click in and out of the sim, the sound changes. It's really frustrating. It's a 737 thing because the 777 has the same menu option in the FMC, and it works. It just doesn't seem to work for some reason. So when you click out of the sim in the 737, you lose your engine sounds, which is a bit frustrating, but there we go. This is the checklist I use for the 737. It's everything that you need is there, so we can go ahead and keep that handy as well. I'll just drag that over here for now. So what have we done? We've loaded the FMC. We've got the weather for Sydney. So we're at Sydney Airport, Kingsford Smith. Temperature is 17. The wind's 350 at 9 knots, which gives us runway 34 for takeoff. The wind's actually backed a little bit now as well. It's come around to more towards 3-4, so that's confirmed using 3-4 as our departure runway. What else we need? We've got the visibility over here, no precipitation, 10k visibility, and the pressure. This is very important here. Most of the world flies on hectopascals, which is the first, or millibars either way, which is the first value there, 10, 12, 10, 12. UK and some parts of Asia I think fly on inches of mercury, which is that figure there, 29 decimal whatever, or 30 decimal whatever, depending on how high the pressure is. Active Sky gives you both, so that is just the same setting depending on what you're using on your altimeter. So we'll be using millibars or hectopascals, 1012, and we use that figure to correctly calibrate the altimeter. So if we look at our altimeter tape on the right hand side here, at the bottom we've got 1017 set, so we need to use the calibration knob, barometric calibration knob up here on the EFIS panel to dial that down to 1012, and you'll notice the actual height readout changes. So at the moment that's reading about 20 or 25 foot, something like that, 30 foot. It's not infinitesimally precise, but it's close enough. And if we grab Active Sky very quickly, and we look here, the elevation for Kingsford Smith, 21 foot. So by calibrating the altimeter to the given value, we are now at 21 foot above mean sea level, which is the airport elevation. So that is what we would use as our calibration setting for whatever airport we're at. We would calibrate to the airport elevation, so we are up at an altitude above mean sea level, and that is known as QNH. So the QNH is 1012. There's also a QFE figure, which is the height of the aircraft above the airfield itself, so that means the altimeter reads 0. So in this case, 1011 is the QFE, 1012 is the QNH. At, say, Alice Springs with an airfield elevation of 1700 feet, I think, thereabouts, the differential between the QFE and the QNH is much greater because obviously the airport elevation is much higher than mean sea level. But typically we don't worry about QFE in instrument flying. 90% of procedures, unless they're very clearly displayed on the chart that it's flown on airfield QFE, then most of them are flown on QNH, and that is the figure you'll be given by air traffic control if you are flying on Flightsim, say. So we can go ahead now and try and get that started again. It's been really frustrating. I must check out if there's a update for GSX. We've got catering, we don't worry about fuel. So we can request boarding and get GSX to start bringing some passengers on board, and we can start prepping the overhead. So we're going to go from the top, we'll go up to the overhead. First thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here, find the APU start switch, click it to the on position, and then click and hold, it will go to start and spring load back to on. That starts the APU start sequence, the auxiliary power unit. And we'll let that spool up, and we'll do the rest of the overhead preparation. So we'll start from the top, we'll go yaw damper on, fuel pumps come on, over the centre section. We don't really use the load monitoring, that just tells you what load is being produced and being required of each electrical source. That's more a maintenance feature. It doesn't really get used a lot in flight unless there's an issue that needs to be troubleshot. The cabin utilities and the entertainment system are on, they stay on. Standby power is set. The APU's just come online, so you can see now we've got the blue light here available. So we click, these are spring-loaded switches, so we click those and the light goes out, which means the APU we can see has an exhaust gas temperature, so it's running, but the light's out, so we're on. The APU is on bus. The electrical bus supply for the APU is connected, which means the electrical supply is coming from the APU, and the electrics are now on APU. The lights are already set. Just the position steady light is on at the moment. I'm just going to go down here. So it's just asked me, that little beep there was GSX asking me to open the forward door. If you look here, as part of my panel that I've loaded and saved and loaded up, it's already open. GSX doesn't seem to recognise that. It wants to see the door open, which it's happened, and now it's going to start boarding some passengers. So there we go, we continue with the overhead flow. So the lighting panel is set. We've just got the red and green wingtip nav lights, steady position lights on at the moment. From the middle we've just got the equipment cooling, supply and exhaust on normal. Emergency exit lights are armed and the guards closed. Seatbelt signs, we've finished refuelling. The refuelling truck has departed, so that can go on. And then over the centre here we've got the window heats on. Probe heats stay off until we push back. The anti-ice is not required. The hydraulics can come on. The door enunciators are as we expect. Cargo doors and the forward and aft left entry doors are open. Pressurisation is 0. The cabin is not in climb, so that checks. The air conditioning section, we can now go trim air to on. Reset fans are auto. Isolation valves open. Packs are auto. Bleed switches are on, and the cruise altitude can be set 340. Overhead panel set, and the MCP is loaded. So we can do our first checklist, which is the pre-flight checklist to the line. So if we go through that in order, we've got the parking brake is set, the batteries are on, guard closed, standby power on, guard closed, centre fuel pump not required because there's no fuel in the centre. If we look down here, there's 0 fuel in the centre. The left aft pump, we've got all the pumps on now. The APU start, APU generators are on bus, position lights steady, logo lights are not required, cabin lighting is controlled by the cabin crew, so we don't have to worry about that. Emergency lighting is armed, guard closed. Passenger signs are on, packs are auto. RS mode selectors are normal, and the FMC is loaded. The pre-flight checklist below the line. We've received our clearance, fictitious clearance from air traffic control. Transponder is set with a code. The MCP is loaded 148.335 5000. 148 knots our V2 speed. 335 degrees our heading. 5000 our initial climb altitude. The yaw damper is on, the window heating is on, the flight altitude is set, landing altitude. This is a question I'm going to pose to Flight Deck to Sim at some point. Is the landing altitude all for the arrival airport always set before departure? I don't know whether it is or not, because I don't know if there's a massive differential between the airport elevation where you are and where you're going to, if it would cause problems to set it before you take off. So that's a question for him. In the meantime, I leave it set until we're in the air. The flight directors can go on. This is on the MCP here. So the two flight director switches can go to on. You'll see the annunciators come on here to the FMA to tell you that the flight directors are on. LRVNAV will leave off for now, as they will be taken off. We'll fly manually to start with as we take off. In fact, we may pop them on at the start of the takeoff end of the runway before we start the takeoff roll. The minimums ref. Okay, so this is this knob on the left hand side here, and as I manipulate it, you'll see it changes one to the other radial barrow. We're going to take off in barometric reference. That means it's referencing the pressurization system of the aircraft rather than the radial altimeter. At the moment, there's no display here. If I manipulate that knob one, then a value comes up. And for takeoff, we're using something called the MFRA, the minimum flap retraction altitude, which is the minimum altitude at which, in the event of an engine failure, we can climb to before we start thinking about cleaning the aircraft up. So that's the MFRA. So that is generally, unless the Boeing performance tool, which real-world Boeing pilots have access to, unless that tells you differently, then it would be airfield elevation plus 1,000 feet. So you're 1,000 foot above ground before you start to retract the flaps, unless notified otherwise. So in this case, we've got 21 foot elevation at the field, so it's 1,021. So we dial in 1,021 feet, and that is the minimum altitude we'll climb to. It gives us a visual reference on the altitude tape on the right hand side, the minimum altitude we'll climb to before starting to clean the aircraft up in the event of an engine failure. So finishing off the checklist, we've got the minimums ref is barrow, and the minimums are set 1,021 foot. The auto brake can go to RTO, rejected takeoff. The comms radios, we're not online talking to Flightsim or anyone at IVAO, so we don't need to worry about that. And the doors, they've just finished boarding. That little gong there, and the beep tells you that we are ready to close up. So we can close up the left fore and aft doors. Go to the next page, we can close the cargo doors as well, and we're going to attempt to get GSX to push us back. So on the next page there, prepare for pushback. Now we know from the charts that we're in a cul-de-sac, so to our right is a dead end. So it's going to ask us nose right, tail left, or nose left, tail right. We want to go nose left, because otherwise if we go nose right, we'll be facing a dead end. Do we want to start engines before pushback? No, we want to start during pushback. So we can go no, and GSX will start to set us up. So we've done the pre-flight checklist to the line. We're going to go overhead now and set for our pushback. So we can confirm we've got the APU generator on bus and the bleed switches on. Pressurization is available from the APU. So if we go down to the FMC and go to ground connections, you can see we've got wheel chocks, ground power, air conditioning. These two are only available once the wheel chocks are set. So we can confirm that the aircraft, the APU, is now supplying air and electrics, so we can remove the wheel chocks, which takes the other ground connections out as well, and allows GSX to connect up the tug ready for pushback. It also means the aircraft is now sort of standalone, it's running off the APU rather than any ground supplies. So the last bits of preparation we need to do before pushback are the air conditioning packs. The packs go off, and that allows they're no longer drawing pressurised air from the APU because they're off, which means all the pressurised air available from the APU can be directed to the aircraft start sequences, which use pressurised air to get the engines moving. The last thing on the overhead panel is the anti-collision light, the red beacon, which goes on, ready to push back. And we can run the before start checklist. The auto throttle is up here, armed. The left and right centre pumps not required. The main fuel pump's on, the electric hydraulic pumps on, the anti-collision light is on, the parking brake is set, the ground equipment is clear, the engine area is clear, and we have been given permission to push back. GSX is shouting at us to remove the parking brake, which we will do. Mine's mapped to the brakes on the rudder pedal, so you can either click it off or use the pedal. And we'll start takeoff from. So we're now good to start our engines, so we'll just make sure we've got the lower display on engines here. That's these buttons here. We've now got all the engine instruments available to us. Go to the overhead. We'll confirm we've got pressure in the duct valve there. The engine start switches are here. We'll start with number 2 first. We'll just switch it to ground. Come down to the display here, and we're looking at the N2 value, which is here, and we've got N2 rotation. We just watch N2 rotation. We're looking for 25%, and this is a very much more automated system in the Airbus. It does it all for you. We're looking for 25% N1 here, and then the fuel cut-off switch underneath the throttles here. 25. We've got fuel going on, and we look up here. We've got N1 rotation. We've got EGT rise, we've got fuel flow, we've got N2 rise, it's come up above 25%, we've got N1 rise, which is coming up off the stops, so we can continue to monitor that. The low pressure warning light's gone out here, and the oil temperature and pressure starting to come up down here. Keep monitoring that. 17%, we can hit click and the start valve closes, and we have good engine. Go overhead, confirm the start valve's clicked off, we can put that to continuous, and then number 1 to ground, and do the same flow. So N2 rotation, parking brake on, got M1 rotation, that's coming up. Fuel's going on. EGT rise. M1. Watching for 17%. Start valve closes and the engine is stable. Go overhead, we can put the start switch to continuous, and they stay there until after departure. And then we need to set the electrics. So this again is all fairly automated on the Airbus, so there's a little less work to do at this stage just to verify that the systems are running correctly. On the Boeing, or on this particular Boeing, on the newer Boeings, is also fairly automated. We do a couple of things here. So we've got the electric panel, we've now got the generate bus off lights on here, so the engines are producing electrical power but they're not currently coupled to the electrical system. The spring-loaded switch is just like the APU. Click those. Now we swap to one blue light there for the APU gen, which means it's producing electricity but it's no longer coupled to the electrics. We can go over here, we can pop the packs back on, APU bleed off, and finally the probe heats can go on. And the last thing to do, we can verify we've got generators on bus and generator bleed switches. Packs are auto, sorry, the isolation valve in the middle also needs to go to auto, and then the APU can go off, and that'll enter a cool down cycle as it powers down. So we can just verify then that we've got all that set, the electrics are still stable, so we were obviously correct, we didn't turn the APU off before we had the generators coupled, otherwise it would have all gone dark and quiet. And then we can use the switches over here on top of the MFD. On the right hand side we can go to system, and we've now got the flight control positions, and we'll just do our quick flight control check. So the elevators, full aft, full forward, neutral, ailerons full left, full right, neutral, rudder full left, full right, and neutral. Flaps we planned 5 for takeoff, so select flaps 5, which is 2 notches, and then we pop the lower display unit off, and then if anything exceeds limits, a warning will pop up down here and it will become immediately visible along with the master caution or master warning. So now we can run the after takeoff, the after start before taxi checklist. So we've got generators 1 and 2 are on bus, probe heats are on, wing anti-ice not required, engine anti-ice not required, packs are auto, isolation valve is auto, APU bleed is off, APU is off, start switch is continuous, flaps 5 required, 5 selected, green light. Thank you. I'm really going to have to succumb to the Windows 10 update eventually. I don't want to, but there we go. Elevator trim is 5.04 units required and set. The recall, we can recall the master caution here on this panel, and if something stays lit we know we've got a master caution that we cancelled earlier but didn't correct. We've got nothing there, so that's fine. The lower DU is off. We've called up and got our taxi clearance. In fact, let's just reference the charts again. So we've called up and we've been given the taxi clearance we expected, which is from here. We're going to go Charlie to Lima, cross 3416 at Lima, or we might be given hold at Lima if there's incoming traffic, and then down to Alpha 6. So we've got our taxi clearance, so we can go up here. We go, taxi turns on, and we are good to taxi. So we're on the still on the cul-de-sac on the apron at the moment. Just pop the transponder to Alt off, so if they've got ground surveillance radar they can see us on that, but we won't interfere with any TCAS warnings on any incoming aircraft, any landing aircraft that we might upset as they're very short finals, because the last thing they want at that stage is a TCAS warning. So we're good to go. We can click the brakes off and advance the throttles. You can see with the PMDG it gives you the little band that references the position you've got your throttles at. That's the commanded thrust, and then you'll see the engine spool up to the actual thrust that's being output. You don't need a lot with the 7.3. As we get moving, we'll just check the brakes, make sure they're working. We've got differential braking, which means the hello, interesting. Must be wet. The 2 main sets of gear have brakes. Obviously, no brakes on the nose wheel, but they can be braked independently, so you can actually use that to help steer the aircraft as well. So our taxi routing is via Charlie. What we will do just quickly is bring this across here, so you can see as we're going, the little moving map symbol here is tracking our position through the airport. So we're going to follow it all the way down Charlie, all the way down to Lima and across. So if you keep that handy, on an iPad or on another monitor just means that you can always track your position. If you've got a particularly complex taxi routing, like I think Los Angeles is quite complicated, Heathrow can be at times with various different named holds and stuff like that. It's useful for plotting your position and making sure you know where you are on the airfield, especially if you're on Flightsim, because it can cause a whole host of grief if you start taxiing places they're not expecting you to go. So we just keep that up on another monitor or up on the iPad. Looking for no more than about 10 knots whilst we're on the apron, just so we don't have any accidents with any ground catering vehicles or trucks or whatever. Now we're out onto the taxiway proper. I think it's carrier operating procedures that limit the taxi speed I think it's between 25 or 30 knots, depending. I'd imagine depending on the aircraft type as well. I don't know if Virgin Australia has a specified taxi limit, but I generally operate around about 30 knots as a maximum. I know Ryanair, I think, is 30 knots maximum. And there we just verify that we're following the correct taxi routing on the way out. So we've just crossed 2507 on Charlie. We're taxiing now down Charlie. And there's a little dog leg at the end here which carries on down towards the intersection with Lima. And you would then just review the takeoff briefing in the taxi as you're making your way down towards the hold. So it's in this case, it'll be a left-hand seat departure because there's only me in the aircraft. It's runway 34. If we just bring the charts across and have a quick look at that. So it's going to be a Wollongong 2 departure off of runway 34. Climbing straight ahead on 335 degrees, which we've got in the MCP, up to a minimum of 800 foot on the altimeter indicated, before a left-hand turn to 290 degrees, and we can verify that that is in fact all in the FMC. That's already, we looked at the route, the magenta line in the FMC, and that's all there. We continue a 290 degree track to 7,000 feet minimum, because we're passing 7,000, and then start a left-hand turn inbound to Ankub. When passing Ankub, there's no height restriction given there. So you can see here there's 800 with a line above and below, so that's at 800 foot. If the line was below 800 foot, if the text was above the line, there was no line there, that would mean 800 or above. Similarly, if the text was below the line and there was no line underneath, it would mean 800 or below. In this case, it is at 800, it's fixed at 800, so at 800 foot you start your left-hand turn, 290 degrees, and then after passing 7,000 feet you start your left turn inbound to Ankub. And that should all be set up in the FMC as part of the departure procedure, and then off down to Wollongong NDB. Okay, so we're coming down here now towards the T-junction, as it were, at the end towards Lima, crossing Bravo 10. So you can read these signs. Different airports are slightly different. The black C there, the Charlie, is what you're on, and then it will tell you what you're intersecting with. So we're on Charlie at the moment, and we're intersecting with Lima. We've just crossed Bravo 10. We're now turning right onto Lima, and we can assume that we've been cleared by ground to cross 1634 at Lima, which we will do. So you can see the red hold markings here and the flashing lights and the red fixed lights there that tell you that's a runway holding point. So if you pass there, you're crossing an active runway. You really don't want to be doing that without definite permission. And you would normally anyway just verify that the approach is clear, nothing coming the other way for any reason, and continue across. And now we're soon to be away from ground post. Now we can pop the weather radar on here. captain side. Also hit the data button, which just means you see the first waypoint there is the 800-foot waypoint for our minimum climb to 800 foot before the turn. If I click data, it will tell you the time there in UTC or Zulu time. It just tells you a quick reference for the time you can expect to be passing that individual waypoint. On the first officer's side, go across there, we would expect to have terrain on his side and data as well. And he would set his range independently of the captain's side for what he wants to see on his map. So we're now taxiing down Alpha on the parallel to 3-4 left, and we're going to taxi all the way to the end for an Alpha 6 departure. Gives us the full length, means we can use that derated power setting, thrust setting for takeoff. So there's very little to do now. It's quite a long taxi out here. Just make sure we've got everything set, got our departure charts up. You could go ahead and verify the departure procedure. You can go through the FMC. Obviously, you'd do that normally before you leave the gate. Actually, step through the FMC and make sure the waypoints are correct. And yeah, in the taxi, you'd just be monitoring the systems. As I say, it's quite a long taxi out. And just preparing for the departure. Single crew operations, obviously, for us, it's a little bit harder because you've got to do everything and point the aircraft in the right direction at the same time. So we'll just bring the checklist across here. So our next checklist here will be the before takeoff checklist, and you can start running that as you come up to the hold. So we'll just get that out of the way. We'll run it now. We'll do it parking brakes off because we're still travelling. So the first item, fuel flow reset rate down here. Not applicable to the Airbus, but we'll do it because we're flying the PMDG. So this switch here, we right click to flick it up to reset, and when it resets is the current fuel flow to the engines, and we leave it in rate. We've got two positions, used or rate. Used is the amount used since engine start. Rate is the current rate of fuel flow. So we flick it to reset and go back to rate. So fuel flow is reset and rate. Centre pump is not required. De-ice is not required. Cabin lighting is controlled by the cabin crew. Flight instruments are checked and set. The engine instruments are checked and verified. The takeoff data is reviewed. No change. The nav equipment is checked and set. We have reached the hold, and we can assume that we're just going to stop very briefly at the hold, pop the taxi light off, call up and say, we call up with a call sign, so we say velocity 874 holding Alpha 6 ready for departure. We may get one of two things: hold position, there might be traffic on finals, we might get line up 3-4 and wait, or we might get clear for takeoff. So let's assume we've been cleared for takeoff, so nothing to affect. So we can go down here, we can pop the transponder to TARA, so it's all the way around. We can go overhead, we can pop the forward-facing landing lights on, and the runway turn-off lights are already on. Start switches are continuous, and we will go down here and we'll start the first officer's clock. That is actually, so that's a complete lie. We would have done that as we left the gate. My apologies. I don't generally run with the clocks running. Verify that we've got flight directors and auto throttle. The MCP is loaded, and we're going to RML now the VNAV, as we've got a fairly immediate turnout to the left at 800 foot. So we've got our takeoff clearance. We can run the before takeoff checklist below the line. I do apologise, I forgot the strobe lights, which are on this one. On the 8737, if your lights are on, the switches are facing forward, except for this one, which is steady on, all off, steady and strobe on. Weird logic, but there you go, it works. So we've got the before takeoff checklist below the line. We've got landing lights on, strobe lights on, taxi lights are off. Transponders TARA traffic is my side, and we would start the captain's side clock for the takeoff roll. I say I don't often fly with the clock, so forgive me if I forget that one. So we're going to just keep ourselves coming forward at about 5 or 6 knots and start that turn onto the centre line. There's not so much of a problem here with a long runway, but with a short runway you wouldn't want to come flying onto the runway at high speed and use a load of tarmac just getting yourself lined up. So we will verify we've got 335, which is the runway heading. Flight directors are in and we're good to go. So I'll just, before we run this, I'll just talk about what we're going to do. We're going to bring the power first of all to 40% on the M1, which is there, selected, and then wait for the engines to stabilise. Just close those off again. At that point we're going to hit toga, take off, go around. With the auto throttle arm, what that does is it then commands the selected takeoff power of 88.2% M1, which is that little yellow chevron there, and you can select toga in a couple of different ways. Button on the throttles will do it for you. PMDG have included a blind click spot, which is just below the course knob. You'll see the cursor change to little pointy hand, or you can map toga to a button which I have on the throttle. Either way, you need to know where that is. We'll then accelerate the aircraft, one hand on the throttle, one hand on the yoke, using the pedals to maintain centre line. And the best way to do that is to look down the far end. Keep that side picture. And then at V1, the aircraft will call V1, we put both hands on the yoke, so we're committed. VR, called rotate, we pull gently back on the yoke and start to pitch the aircraft up. At which point, or at some point before that, in fact, the flight director bar will have shot through and up to probably somewhere around about 17 degrees nose up. We don't want to exceed 17, I think it's about 18, we certainly don't want to exceed 20 degrees pitch up, no matter what the flight director commands in the takeoff. We never exceed 20 degrees pitch up in the takeoff. I think it's 20, Flight Director Sim has a good video on this, which might be worth just checking out. And then we just maintain that, watching the speed, making sure we're climbing away and slowly accelerating the aircraft. It all comes fairly quickly, so just bear with me on this one. It may take a couple of attempts to follow this through to really grasp what's going on. So stick with me, and here we go. So we're good to go. We'll bring in power to 40% and let the engine stabilise. Engine is stable, thrust is symmetrical, we can hit toga, and watch the aircraft then command the throttles to take off power. 88.2, take off power set, watching the airspeed to live, frame rates are terrible. Sydney City Centre really hammers my frame rates. We're using the pedals just to maintain centre line. Remember, we've got a very slight crosswind from the right, 360 I think was the wind, so I would try and push the nose round to the right. Always push, because it will push the tail from the vertical stabiliser, so it will push the nose the opposite direction, so it pushes the nose into wind. There we go, we've got the speed coming. V1, hands on the yoke, rotate, pulling back and holding that pitch command there, bringing the nose up to a positive rate, gear up. Gear selected up to 20 degrees pitch up. The flight director is actually commanding slightly less than that, which is good. We'll follow the commands of the flight director because we want to accelerate the aircraft to that commanded speed. And we've got 800 foot, we can start our turn out. Pitching the aircraft down and just following the flight director commands, and then we can engage. Autopilot with the command button over here should capture that profile, and then we just check the FMAs. We've got M1 LNAV speed in command. That tells us we have the N1 being commanded by the auto throttle, the LNAV, the lateral navigation, being commanded by the FMC, the VNAV speed, vertical navigation and speed profile being commanded by the FMC, and then we're just watching the speed tape. So this 1 here is the speed at which we cannot go below without flaps 1 out. So we've currently got flaps 2, so we pass the flaps 1, that's the minimum flap 1 speed, so we can go to flaps 1, and then we're just watching for the up speed, and passing the up speed we can go flaps up, and then we can start the after takeoff flow. So that would be the first officer would be monitoring the flying and doing the clean up. So we'd go auto brakes off, gear lever off, engine start switches off, retractable landing lights on the 737, there's two sets, fixed and retracted, retracts off and retracted, turn off lights off, and we can verify there's 1,000, that's the horn, 1,000 to go to 5,000, just swing the heading bug around to match the heading as well. And we'd normally be talking to approach by this point. They probably say to us velocity 874, continue climb via the SID, flight level 270. So we can dial in 270 up here. And we can, because it's captured 5,000 already, we just hit flight level change, and we'll command the aircraft back into climb. Once it's back into climb, we can go back to VNAV, and then the VNAV profile continue. So we can then run the after takeoff checklist. We can confirm we've got a positive rate gear up, the auto brakes, positive rate gear up, that's definitely happened, that was a while ago. We've confirmed we've got the gear up and off, we've got the auto brakes off, engine start switches off, runway turn off lights are off, and the cabin lighting is as required, which is set to by the cabin crew. Now you may be lucky, you're climbing now through 8,000 to getting it to 7,500 to 270. You may be lucky and get a shortcut via approach. They may vector you and give you a direct to one of your waypoints just to cut the corner, and I'll show you how we do that. They quite often take a little bit off the route for you just to help the time constraints and help with air congestion and so on. So we've done the after takeoff checklist. We're coming up to 10,000 feet. So the next bit we're looking at in the actual climb out is passing 10. We would do two things. Passing 10, we go landing lights off and seatbelt signs to auto. Also at 10,000 feet, because we looked at the charts, the transition altitude was 10,000 feet. You can see the reference for the altimeter, the calibration, barometric calibration for the altimeter has gone yellow. We've passed the transition level. So at transition level, or before, some carriers will allow you to hit standard, go to standard once you're cleared to a flight level rather than altitude. So going up to a flight level within standard, and it changes to standard, which is 1013, 1013 or 2992, depending on whether you're calibrated in hectopascals or inches of mercury. And that is now set as a flight, so it's referencing a flight level. It means that we are referencing altitude based on a pressure setting of 1013, 1013 millibars. Every aircraft flying at a flight level, flying above the transition level, will be on 1013, which means if you're flying on a reciprocal airway, so you've got aircraft travelling in both directions, and you're at 270 and they're at 280, they will be exactly 1,000 foot above you, not 500 foot or 200 foot, or wherever they may have taken off from. They have a different altimeter setting and be wildly different to you. Once you pass transition into flight levels, you're at 1013 and you set standard and you are off the same reference point. So that's the transition level, the transition altitude. We do the same coming down. When we're cleared down to an altitude, then they'll give you descend maintain 5,000 feet on the QNH 1015, whatever it may be, you can then dial in 1015 and press the standard button again. It switches it back to whatever you've got dialed in, and descend to an altitude rather than a flight level. So that is your transition altitude, transition level. So we would be matching the heading bug to our heading. At the moment you can see from the display here we've got a wind of 291 degrees from 291 from the right, 36 knots, which is pushing us to the left. So in order to maintain this track across the ground, so the one running DB, we have to steer there. And that is quite a useful feature of the Boeing. It tells you your crosswind correction to maintain the design track. So we just keep that set. So if ATC suddenly said for traffic turn right heading 210, we can go into heading mode, and we're already flying the heading we're on. It won't suddenly dive us off somewhere else, and then we can steer a heading that would command head, go back into LNAV, and it will put us on that track. We can now assume that we've been cleared further up to our cruise altitude of flight level 340. We've dialed in there, and we would just periodically at 10,000 foot and going on up, we just verify that the pressurization is set at normal, cabins in the climb still, the differential is acceptable, everything is normal, and there you go. That is the most complicated, the most intense section of the flight done for now. The approach obviously becomes more intense again, and it's all about planning. So the next bit we're going to look at, once we get into the cruise, we're all the way up to passing flight level 192 now, flight level 340. We just maintain, so what I normally do is pop that out, just make sure you've got a couple of waypoints visible. Let's just also assume that they've cleared us now direct on a route, give us a bit of a shortcut. Yeah, the FMC. Let's say they've cleared us direct to RASI, so we go to the legs page, grab RASI, and that puts it in the dispatch pad. Bring it up to the top, the very first line on the legs page, and it goes modify, sure, execute that, and that becomes the next waypoint. And it will command, because we're in LNAV, it will command to direct to RASI. So you may get shortcuts or direct twos from time to time. It's just a really handy way for ATC of either clearing up their airspace or cutting corners for you to get you, if the traffic levels dictate that they can do it, then they'll give you shortcuts to get you ahead of schedule and keep you on time on route. So yeah, we are now climbing away to 340 cruise and just monitoring the system. So that is it. That's the most intense stage of the flight over. We'd be handed off to centre at some point, or we would have done way before now. And then if there's full ATC online, we would be handed to the next centre as we fly down towards Melbourne. So I'll leave this one here because that is basically it in terms of basic stuff. Now there's more complicated stuff we can do as we get further into the channel, or as I say, go and check out Flightsim for some of the more complicated FMC tips and tricks that it does and so on. Procedural stuff, that's quite interesting. Otherwise, we will see you a bit later on in the cruise for some descent planning. I hope this has been useful, and we'll catch you soon. Cheers.